back to Know Your Bible. I'm Reverend Birgit Gaudreau, and today we're going to study Genesis chapter 37. So last week we learned that God gave Jacob a new name, Israel, and also we learned that Esau, his brother, separated himself from Jacob, and his sons and grandsons became chiefs and leaders of many lands and cities. So before I start this chapter, I want to tell you that I have been getting great information from Dr. Baruch Korman, and he is a Jewish scholar, and you can find him on loveisrael.org. So Israel and his family are dwelling in the land of Canaan, and now Joseph is 17 years old.
Verse 2. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father.
So some of Joseph's brothers came from the maidservant wives and had a different background than Rachel and Leah. So it mentions in verse 3 that Israel had Benjamin and Joseph at an old age. And this means he was retired. He wasn't working out in the fields anymore or doing all the work. He was in the home most of the time, and he could teach and instruct Joseph and Benjamin. And so they became very close and dear, and he knew that this was God's timing, that he had the opportunity to instruct Joseph and Benjamin in a very special way to carry on the inheritance of his father and grandfather Abraham.
Verse 4. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him.
So some people do not agree with the fact that Israel, Joseph's father, favored him over all the other sons. But here, spiritually, Israel knew that Joseph would take the lead and inherit the blessings from his father and his grandfather. So Joseph's half-brothers did not want to understand or even accept the fact that Joseph was the chosen one to inherit Abraham and Isaac's promises from God. So they were very jealous and very angry over Joseph. In verse 5, God gave Joseph insight, gave him a dream, and he told his brothers about this dream, and they really hated him for telling them this dream.
Verse 6 to 8. So he said to them, Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaf stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for this dream and for his words.
So God was trying to give the family and the brothers and the father a revelation of what God is planning for Joseph. So in verse 9 it says that Joseph had yet another dream and told his brothers and father about it. And of course they mocked him over this dream, and his father didn't quite believe what he was saying and did not know if this was really from the Lord.
Verse 9 to 11. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers, and he said, Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind.
Now, through the dreams that Joseph had, God was confirming that he is the spiritual ruler and would inherit the promises of God. So now when Israel gave Joseph this tunic, this coat of many colors, it was to represent that he is carrying the inheritance of Abraham and Isaac. Also, you can look in the book of Samuel about the tunic, what it represents. And back in the day, the children of kings would wear a tunic like this to represent that they inherit the kingdom in the future. So his older half-brothers were very jealous of this, that Joseph would inherit and rule over the family, and this was not going down well with them. Also, Israel trusted Joseph to bring back a report from the brothers, and he trusted Joseph that he would always be honest and faithful to his calling. So in verse 13, Israel is asking Joseph to go out in the field and check out on the brothers and to see if they're doing their job right or feeding the flock. So he went out to look for his brothers. Now Joseph was out in the field in Hebron, and he was looking for his brothers, and here this stranger showed up, and scholars are assuming that it was an angel coming out of nowhere and giving Joseph instruction where his brothers are. And I'm going to read a little bit for you. Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" And so he said, "I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks." And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went there after and found his brothers in Dothan.
Verse 18 to 22. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father."
So here we see that Reuben was the oldest brother, and he wanted to deliver Joseph back to his father, and he wanted no part of bloodshedding. So in verse 23 it says, "So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic and the tunic of many colors that was on him." So they were very angry at the fact that he was supposed to be the future leader of the family and inherit all the promises of Abraham and Isaac. And then they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty and there was no water in it. So this was a horrible shock for Joseph, what his brothers were doing to him. In verse 25 it mentions that these Ishmaelites had spices with them, and these spices were actually spices to bury a person.
Verse 25 to 28. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Galilee with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, and on their way to carry them down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. and they took Joseph to Egypt.
So in verse 29, it mentions that the older brother Reuben is coming back. He wasn't around this whole time when the Ishmaelites came and when they pulled him out of the pit. And here it says, then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit. So now he tore his clothes, and this is what they did back then if they were angry and grieving over the fact of someone that has passed away or is gone. And then he said, and he returned then to the brothers, and he said, the lad is no more. And he's asking, where is he? So now the brothers, they got their heads together and created a new plan to convince their father that Joseph was killed. And so what they did is they put goat's blood on the tunic and they sent it, like sending through the mail. They sent this and they didn't bring it personally to him. So in verse 32 it says they sent the tunic, so someone else brought it over there, and then they took it and presented it to their father.
Verse 33 to 35. And he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. And he said, for I shall go down in the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him.
So the brothers did not take into account that their father Israel would mourn so much that no one could comfort him. And so they probably thought that, oh, when Joseph is gone, one of us will lead the family. One of us will inherit the promises of Abraham, but that did not happen. I also want to mention that back then, 30 days was the time of mourning, but Israel, he could not stop mourning over his son Joseph. So I'm going to read to you the last verse here, 36. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. So in this lesson we can learn that everything is in God's hand and he has control, and it's all about God's timing. Even if things look extremely bad, as it did for Joseph when he was thrown in the pit and taken to slavery. But you see, everything had a purpose, and at the end, God was glorified through Joseph. So that wraps up the lesson for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and please join me again next week as we study Genesis chapter 38.